Have you ever heard a voice so pure, it seemed to rise above pain itself, a voice born not in comfort, but in hunger, rain, and forgotten corners of a city? This is the story of Miguel Santos, a 15-year-old boy from the crowded streets of Manila, whose voice carried the ache of 1,000 sleepless nights. He had no stage, no microphone, no fancy clothes, only a small tin can that echoed with the sound of spare coins and dreams. Beside him, life was a silent witness. His younger sister, Laura, just 8 years old, would often sit on a broken step nearby, clutching an old stuffed toy, their mother's last gift before she passed. Lara's eyes carried both pride and fear, pride for her brother's courage, fear of what tomorrow might bring. And somewhere far away, across oceans and bright lights, destiny was quietly waiting, on a stage called International Got Talent, AGT, where thousands came chasing fame, but only a few arrived carrying truth. How does a boy with nothing but a cracked guitar and a trembling voice end up standing before Simon Cowell himself? How does pain turn into music so powerful that it could silence a crowd and make the harshest critic wipe away a tear? As the world rushes forward, chasing success and spotlight, Miguel's story reminds us that sometimes, the greatest voices are not heard in studios or arenas, they echo from alleyways, from those who sing not for applause, but for survival. This is not a story of talent alone. It's a story of love, loss, and the kind of faith that grows in darkness. It's about a brother who sang for his sister, and in doing so, touched millions. Before the lights, before the fame, before the tears, there was just a boy, a song, and a dream strong enough to move the world. Miguel Santos was not like other 15-year-olds. While most boys his age were in classrooms, laughing with friends, or scrolling through phones, Miguel's mornings began beneath the rusted awning of a small bakery in the heart of Manila. He'd wake before sunrise, his body sore from the concrete floor, his first thought not of breakfast, but of survival. He carried with him a small guitar, its wood cracked, its strings uneven, yet it was his most precious belonging. He had found it in a garbage pile 2 years ago, cleaned it, and learned to make it sing. Every chord carried a story, every note a memory. Music was his only escape from the weight of poverty, from the memories of his mother's voice fading away in a hospital room they couldn't afford. Miguel's father, once a fisherman, had disappeared after the typhoon took their home. Since then, Miguel had taken the role of both brother and protector to little Laura. She was the reason he smiled even when hunger pressed against his ribs. Every coin he earned from singing went to buy her rice, or sometimes, a piece of bread they'd share under a flickering streetlight. Despite everything, Miguel wasn't bitter. He carried a quiet gentleness, the kind that made strangers stop and listen. His eyes always seemed to be searching the sky, as if asking the stars when his mother would hear his songs again. Every evening, after the rush of the city slowed, he'd hum softly to himself, his voice echoing through the narrow alleyways. He wasn't chasing fame, only peace. Yet, deep inside, there was a hidden spark, a longing to be seen, to be heard beyond the streets that had become his stage. Miguel's life was simple, repetitive, yet filled with small moments of grace, sharing laughter with Laura over leftover bread, watching sunsets paint hope across the polluted sky, and whispering promises to his mother's photograph that one day, his voice would change their fate. He didn't know how, or when. But he believed that music, the only thing he truly owned, could one day open a door to a life beyond the streets. There came a time when even Miguel's songs could no longer drown out the noise of reality. The city that once echoed his music began to turn cold. Fewer people stopped to listen, fewer coins dropped into his tin can. The bakery where he slept shut down, and the alley that had once been their home became another construction site. For the first time, Miguel felt something he had always tried to avoid, hopelessness. Laura had grown weaker, her small frame often shivered at night. She had caught a fever that wouldn't go away, and the cheap medicine from the corner stall did little to help. Miguel watched helplessly as her bright eyes dimmed, and he realized how powerless he truly was. He blamed himself in quiet moments. He thought of all the nights he spent singing instead of finding better work, all the times he believed that his voice could somehow save them. The streets, once his open stage, now felt like a cage closing in. The world moved on, cars rushed, people hurried, and in their rush, no one noticed the boy sitting by the lamppost with a guitar heavier than his heart. Each note he sang began to tremble with pain. Music, once his escape, now became a reminder of everything he couldn't fix. He missed his mother more than ever, her soft hands, her lullabies, her faith that life would get better. He wished she were there to tell him what to do, to give him strength when he had none left. One evening, as rain poured over the city, Miguel sat under a torn umbrella with Lara asleep beside him. Her breathing was weak, her tiny fingers clinging to his arm. He looked at her and realized, this was the breaking point. He couldn't let her fade away like their mother. Something had to change. That night, beneath the sound of thunder and tears, Miguel made a silent promise. He would take his voice beyond these streets. He would sing not just for coins, but for a chance, no matter how impossible it seemed, to save the only family he had left. Fate often arrives quietly, not in grand gestures, but in moments that seem ordinary until they change everything. For Miguel, it began with a stranger holding a camera. One morning, as the sun burned through the Manila haze, Miguel stood at his usual spot near a busy intersection. His guitar rested against his chest, his voice fragile but full of soul. He sang an old Tagalog song, one his mother used to hum while cooking rice, and though the crowd barely noticed, one man did. He was a tourist, touched by the boy's sincerity. Without saying a word, he recorded Miguel's performance and later uploaded it online with the caption, "The voice of an angel, found on the streets of Manila." Days passed, and Miguel knew nothing of it. But the video began to spread like wildfire. People around the world were moved by the raw emotion in his voice. Comments poured in, tears, prayers, and words of admiration. Among the millions who watched was a producer from International Got Talent, AGT, who couldn't forget the boy's trembling yet heavenly tone. Weeks later, Miguel was approached by a woman in a simple dress near the marketplace. She introduced herself as a representative from IGT's Asia auditions. At first, he thought it was a cruel joke, who would invite a street singer to an international stage? But when she showed him the video, now with millions of views, Miguel's hands shook. For the first time, he saw himself not as a street boy, but as someone the world wanted to hear. That night, he ran home to Lara with tears in his eyes. She smiled faintly, her weak body wrapped in a blanket, whispering that their mother must be watching from heaven. Miguel held her hand and promised that no matter how far he had to go, he would sing for both of them, and for every child who had ever felt unseen. It was the moment everything changed. A voice born in silence was now being called to the world's biggest stage. Destiny had finally heard his song. The journey from the streets of Manila to the shining stage of International Got Talent was not a fairy tale, it was a storm Miguel had to walk through barefoot. When he boarded the airplane for the first time, his heart pounded harder than any rhythm he had ever played. Everything felt unreal, the lights, the cameras, the luxury of a hotel room, the endless rehearsals. But beneath the wonder, there was fear, a deep, haunting fear that he didn't belong. Every contestant around him wore fine clothes, spoke fluent English, and carried confidence like armor. Miguel, with his second-hand shoes and trembling hands, felt small, a street boy standing among stars. Each night, he would call Lara through a borrowed phone. Her voice grew weaker, but her words steadied him. She reminded him of why he sang, not for fame, not for money, but for love. "Sing for us, Kuya," she would whisper. And he would close his eyes, remembering the sound of Manila rain, the smell of bread from the bakery, and the way their mother used to hum before sleeping. Rehearsals were grueling. His nerves often got the better of him, his voice cracked, his timing slipped. There were moments he almost gave up, moments when he stood backstage, staring at the exit door, ready to leave everything behind. But each time, he remembered Lara's smile, fragile yet full of hope. That memory became his strength. He learned that courage wasn't about never being afraid, it was about singing through the fear. Each mistake became a lesson, each tear a quiet vow to do better. Slowly, he began to find his rhythm again, not just in music, but in faith. Miguel discovered that his voice wasn't meant to be perfect. It was meant to be real, raw and full of the cracks that came from surviving. The audience didn't need a polished star. They needed a story, a soul. By the time his name was called for the live audition, Miguel had changed. He was no longer just the boy from the streets. He had become something greater, a symbol of every dreamer who dared to rise from the dust and sing. When Miguel stepped off that grand stage, the lights behind him dimming and the roar of the audience echoing in his ears, he didn't feel like a star, he felt like a son, a brother, and a survivor who had finally been heard. Simon Cowell's tears, the golden confetti, the standing ovation, all of it felt like a dream. But deep inside, Miguel knew the true miracle wasn't the applause. It was that his song had reached hearts far beyond what he could see. News of his performance traveled back to the streets of Manila. People who once passed him by without a glance now gathered around their small televisions, watching the boy who had once sung for coins now sing for the world. Even Lara, lying in a hospital bed, smiled through her tears as she watched her brother's face light up the screen. In that moment, she wasn't just proud, she was healed in spirit, knowing her brother's voice had given meaning to their pain. But Miguel's story didn't end with fame. He returned home months later, still humble, still carrying his old guitar. He began using his platform to help children who lived as he once had, kids with dreams trapped behind hunger and fear. He built small music programs, taught them songs, and told them that even when the world seems deaf, they must never stop singing. Through his journey, Miguel learned that success is not measured by trophies or lights, but by the lives we touch along the way. His mother's words echoed in his heart, that pain, when carried with faith, becomes the purest form of art. And so, his music became more than melody, it became a prayer, a bridge between struggle and hope. Miguel's story reminds us all that sometimes, the most powerful voices come from the quietest places, from those who have known loss, hunger, and loneliness. Because when they sing, they don't just perform, they heal. In the end, the boy who once sang for survival taught the world something far greater. That even in the darkest corners, a single voice, pure and honest, can still reach heaven. Sometimes, the most powerful voices rise not from grand stages but from the forgotten corners of the world. What happens when a boy who sings for coins on the streets suddenly stands under the brightest spotlight of his life? Under the heavy lights of Ireland's Got Talent, a thin boy in a second-hand shirt stood silently, clutching a microphone that looked too big for his trembling hands. The audience whispered, curious and doubtful. Who was he? Just another hopeful among thousands, or something more? Back in the slums of Manila, Raphael's songs had no microphones, no cameras, no applause. His voice echoed through narrow alleys, blending with the hum of tricycles and the cries of street vendors. Each note he sang was a silent prayer, for food, for hope, for his ailing grandmother who waited for him every night. He never imagined his voice would travel beyond those crowded streets. Yet, here he was, oceans away from home, standing before Simon Cowell, the man whose eyes had judged legends. The stage fell silent. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. The judges leaned forward, expecting nervous failure or childish talent. But as the first note escaped Raphael's lips, something shifted. The room softened. The whispers died. That voice, pure, trembling, and golden, filled the air like sunlight breaking through clouds. It wasn't just a performance, it was a cry from a boy who had known hunger, loss, and love deeper than most. As the final note lingered, you could see it, the rare glimmer in Simon's eyes. The audience didn't just hear a song, they felt a story. And in that moment, one question burned in everyone's heart. How could a boy with nothing sound like an angel who had seen heaven? Raphael Cruz had lived most of his 17 years beneath the gray skies of Manila, where dreams were as fragile as the paper boats he used to float down the rain-filled gutters. He was a quiet boy, humble, polite, with eyes that always seemed to carry stories too heavy for his age. Life had taught him to listen more than speak, to smile even when hunger twisted in his stomach. Every morning, before the city awoke, Raphael would slip out of their tiny one-room house, careful not to wake his grandmother, Lola Maria. He carried his old guitar, its strings mismatched and frayed, and walked to the same busy street corner near the market. That was his stage. That was where he sang, softly at first, then louder as the city's chaos began. His songs were simple, old Filipino ballads, the ones Lola taught him, and the English tunes he learned from a broken radio. People often tossed coins without looking. Some stopped for a moment, recording him on their phones, then walked away. But Raphael never minded. Each coin meant a small meal, a few medicines for Lola, or a candle for his parents' graves. He had a strange habit whenever he sang, closing his eyes so tightly it almost looked painful. It wasn't shyness, it was escape. In those moments, he wasn't a street singer anymore. He was someone free, someone seen. The world faded, and only his voice remained. At night, he'd return home exhausted, placing a few crumpled bills into a tin box by Lola's bed. She would smile weakly, touch his cheek, and whisper that his voice would one day change their lives. He always laughed softly, never believing it. To Raphael, that dream was too big, too far. Yet deep inside, there was something unspoken, a quiet flame of hope. A belief that maybe, just maybe, his songs were meant for more than the street corner. Maybe one day, someone would really listen. And though the world around him was harsh and unforgiving, Raphael's heart stayed kind, his voice gentle, and his faith unbroken, like the faint light of dawn that never stopped returning, no matter how dark the night had been. For Raphael, life had always been a quiet war between hope and survival. But the day Lola Maria fell sick, that balance shattered completely. Her soft coughs turned into painful wheezes, and the woman who had once hummed along to his songs now lay weak on a thin mattress, barely able to speak. The doctor's words echoed in Raphael's mind like a storm: pneumonia, hospital, money. Words he couldn't afford. He tried to sing longer hours, standing under the scorching sun until his throat burned. He sang in bus terminals, in front of fast food shops, even late into the night when the city slept. His voice grew tired, but his heart refused to stop. Every coin felt like a heartbeat for Lola. Yet no matter how hard he worked, it was never enough. Each evening, he returned to find her weaker, her smile smaller, her hands colder. She still told him to keep singing, to never give up on his dream. But Raphael felt nothing like a dreamer anymore, just a boy watching his only family fade away. The loneliness crept in quietly. He would sit outside their home at night, looking up at the stars, whispering songs he no longer had the strength to sing in public. The same stars his mother once told him were angels listening to prayers. He wondered if they could hear his. One night, a sudden rain drenched him while performing. His guitar strings snapped mid-song, and the small crowd scattered. Raphael stood alone under a flickering streetlight, holding the broken instrument close to his chest. That was when the weight of everything crashed down, the hunger, the fear, the helplessness. He fell to his knees and wept for the first time in years. That night changed something inside him. He realized he couldn't fight alone anymore. He needed a miracle, not for fame, not for wealth, but for the woman who had believed in him when no one else did. And sometimes, the universe listens when a heart breaks loudly enough. Fate often moves quietly, like a soft wind that changes the direction of a flame without warning. For Raphael, that change began on a humid afternoon when he was singing outside a cafe near the old church. His voice was weak from days without rest, but still, he sang, eyes closed, pouring his soul into every trembling note of "Can't Help Falling in Love." Inside the cafe, a woman named Claire O'Donnell, a visiting Irish music producer, was having coffee. She had been in the Philippines scouting for street musicians for a charity project. The moment Raphael's voice reached her ears, she froze. It wasn't just beautiful, it was haunting, raw, and filled with a kind of sorrow that only truth could create. She stepped outside and watched the boy sing, barefoot, drenched in sweat, his old guitar out of tune but his soul perfectly in rhythm. When he finished, she walked up to him, dropped a folded note into his box, and disappeared into the crowd. Raphael didn't open it until that evening. It wasn't money. It was a letter. Inside were just a few words. You have something the world needs to hear. Call this number. Claire. At first, Raphael thought it was a prank. Why would anyone from Ireland want to hear him sing? But Lola, with her trembling hands, urged him to call. The next morning, he borrowed a neighbor's phone and dialed. The voice on the other end invited him to audition for Ireland's Got Talent, the international version. Expenses covered. A chance of a lifetime. It felt unreal. Raphael had never even been on a plane, never left his city, never believed the world could open its doors to someone like him. But when Lola pressed his hands and whispered, "Go, Anak, let them see what I already know," he knew this was the moment everything had led to. That night, he sat beside her, singing one last song before his journey. Her eyes glistened, not from fear, but from pride. And for the first time, Raphael allowed himself to believe that maybe dreams didn't only belong to others. Maybe this time, the song would finally be his. The journey to Ireland felt like stepping into another world. The air was cold, the streets too quiet, and everything smelled of rain and distance. For Raphael, it was both terrifying and beautiful. He carried nothing but a small bag, a borrowed coat, and a heart full of trembling hope. During rehearsals, he felt invisible among the polished contestants with fancy clothes and trained voices. Their laughter echoed through the hallways while he stood in a corner, clutching his old guitar, afraid to break it out of tune. The cameras, the lights, the noise, it all felt too big for a boy who once sang to the rhythm of tricycles. He missed Lola deeply. Every time he sat alone in his room, he would look at her picture tucked inside his wallet. It reminded him why he was here, to make her proud, to give her the comfort she had sacrificed for him all his life. But some nights, fear crept in like a shadow. What if he failed? What if his voice cracked? What if he wasn't enough? Still, Raphael kept singing. He practiced alone on the balcony, whispering melodies into the cold night air. His voice carried across the dark, fragile but determined. He wasn't singing for fame, he was singing for faith, for gratitude, for the street corners that had shaped him. Slowly, something began to change. He realized that his story wasn't something to hide, it was his strength. The cracks in his voice, the trembling in his tone, they weren't flaws. They were truth. His songs carried pain, but also light. One evening, before the big performance, he closed his eyes and prayed, not to win, but to be brave enough to sing with honesty. That was the night he grew, not as a performer, but as a person. When he finally stepped onto the stage, his fear didn't vanish, but it turned into something else, purpose. He wasn't just a boy from the streets anymore. He was a voice born from struggle, carrying the sound of every broken dream that refused to die. The hall was wrapped in a breathless silence as Raphael stepped into the center of the stage. The light above him felt like sunlight piercing through a storm, warm, blinding, almost unreal. His fingers shook as he gripped the microphone. For a heartbeat, the world disappeared, the judges, the crowd, the cameras. It was just him and the memory of Lola's trembling voice saying, "Sing with your heart, Anak." The first piano notes began, soft as falling rain. Raphael closed his eyes and sang. His voice rose slowly, fragile but full of feeling, filling every corner of the theater with a haunting purity that no training could ever teach. Each lyric carried pieces of his life, the echo of Manila's crowded streets, the smell of rain-soaked pavement, the warmth of his grandmother's hands. It was not just a song. It was a lifetime poured into melody. As he reached the chorus, emotion broke through his control. His voice trembled, cracked, but never lost its light. You could feel every wound, every prayer, every moment of faith stitched into his tone. The audience was still, tears gleaming in the glow of the stage lights. When the final note faded, Raphael stood frozen, head bowed, chest heaving. For a moment, there was nothing but silence, a silence that felt sacred. Then, all at once, the crowd erupted. People rose to their feet, clapping, shouting, crying. The judges stood in awe. And in the midst of that thunderous applause, Simon Cowell, the man known for his hardest heart, pressed the golden buzzer. The music swelled, golden confetti burst from above, and the stage transformed into a cascade of shimmering light. Raphael fell to his knees, tears streaming down his face, whispering a thank you to the heavens. He looked upward, as if speaking to Lola across oceans and screens. Somewhere back home, in a dimly lit room, she was crying too, her frail hands pressed over her heart, whispering his name. In that glowing rain of gold, Raphael wasn't just a poor street singer anymore. He was proof that the smallest voice, when born from love and pain, can echo across the world. When the lights dimmed and the echoes of applause faded, what remained was not just a victory, it was a story of faith, love, and the quiet strength of the human spirit. Raphael's journey wasn't about fame or fortune. It was about a boy who believed in something greater than his circumstances, the power of holding on when life gives you every reason to let go. Back home in Manila, news of his golden buzzer moment spread through the neighborhood like a sunrise. Children played his song on their phones, vendors replayed his performance on small TV screens, and strangers spoke his name with pride. But for Raphael, the real prize was not the trophy or the attention, it was the thought of Lola Maria smiling through her tears, finally seeing the world recognize what she had known all along. Raphael's story became more than entertainment, it became a reminder. A reminder that dreams are not measured by where you start, but by how deeply you dare to believe. That sometimes, the world overlooks the quiet souls, until their truth becomes too beautiful to ignore. He had sung in the streets for coins, but those same streets had taught him something priceless: humility, gratitude, and resilience. Every struggle, every tear, every sleepless night had carved the depth in his voice, the voice that moved millions. Life, he realized, is not about avoiding pain, but transforming it into purpose. And though success had found him, Raphael never forgot where he came from. He continued to sing, not on grand stages alone, but in hospitals, orphanages, and small community gatherings, where hearts still needed healing more than applause. His story teaches us that even the faintest light can shine through the darkest places. That sometimes, the world's angels don't have wings, they have songs. And somewhere, under a Manila sunset, a grandmother's prayer still floats in the air, a reminder that love, when believed in fiercely enough, can turn even the poorest street singer into the voice that makes the world listen.